Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kai Johnson. I'm one of the co-chairs. I joined Climate Reality, this particular group, about a year ago, and it was about that time that Don Bocelli, I think I got that pronunciation right, had given a talk on regenerative agriculture, and the concept was very intriguing to me. And having grown up in far North Dakota, I'm very used to agriculture as well. Never worked directly in it, but always been fascinated by the land around us and being good stewards of the land. I dove into the content and was really curious about it. And that sent me on a journey that ended up pointing me to Jordan at Edible Landscapes. And so through some discussions with him about doing a project on our property here, decided to bring him in. And that's when he's presented or pulled together this presentation and for everybody here tonight. So um, with that, Jordan, I'd like to pass it over to you to introduce everything there is about um, permaculture and agroforestry and being good stewards of the land.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. So anyway, I'm just so grateful to be here. It seems like just an amazing group of people who are really, conscientious and towards the environment and, what we can do from a local perspective, right, to solve for some of these big global challenges that we face today. And so I'm really grateful to work with Kai on a project, and I'm so grateful that he invited us to be myself and Tim, who can't be here tonight, but I'll speak for him, to be sharing a little bit about foodscapes, agroforestry, food forests, and permaculture, and all these words. I'm sure that some of you may be pretty familiar with it, and others might be more novice to some of these things. So I hope that today, when I speak to some of these regenerative agriculture concepts and themes and projects that we're doing, that it's insightful, and it's also, I think that I heard the word activating earlier, right? But it activates, everybody who's listening either on this call or, listening to this on, when this is posted online, in a way just to take small steps to, in your backyard, right? To help bring some of the food production closer at home. So with that, I mean, I can just dive in. Kai, do you have any other things to share before we dive in? I'm just maybe a poll of hands. Who's really interested in this or is familiar with permaculture? Okay, perfect. Awesome. Can everybody hear me okay? Just a quick, okay.
Yeah, come through great.
Cool. So my name is Jordan, and I'm going to go through the following information today. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction about who we are, dive into a little background in our story, how we fell into this, right? Like I never thought I would be doing this, right? I was in global travel of all things a few years ago. We're going to talk about the global challenge that we face with the current food system, and then a local solution that everybody can take. There's not one household in America that, I know if you live in a townhome, it's more challenging, but anybody who has a home with even a little bit of yard can take a small step towards doing some of this foodscaping, food forest, permaculture work. I'm going to share a little bit about how foodscapes support climate and ecological goals, and then what steps you can take. And then at the end, there's some case studies I could show you if we have time, and then go through some Q&A for if you have any burning questions at the end. So does that sound good? Perfect. All right, so brief introduction. This is me and my wife. We're the founders of Edible Landscapes Minnesota. She's like, I call her the chief people officer, right? She's does kind of the admin stuff, helps with the trade shows, runs our payroll and those types of things. What I would call myself is the chief edible officer. So I'm responsible for kind of the oversight of the organization, hiring new employees, new crew members, doing a lot of the sales efforts, and even being on site. We're not like a huge organization right now. I'll show you, before these are a few of our employees. I'm on the top. We have Tim, who's our lead permaculturist and lead designer, and then Kate, who's our lead foodscaper. So it's really us three doing the bulk of the work. We have a couple other employees and then a lot of contractors that do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So this is our peach tree, and these are our three sons. I call them the future foodscapers. A little fun fact is that a lot of people don't know that you can actually grow peaches in Minnesota. There's two different varieties of peaches, Contender and Reliance Peach. And as I noticed that, last year and the last few years, we've been having a huge bounty. And I think part of the reason is just that the spring frost hasn't been as early. And so sometimes the risk with peaches is if the frost does come, it can really sometimes take out a crop for the year. And so it's been interesting to see especially since 2020, our peach trees just really started packing out fruit. And there again is a little bit of it. Just show you a little bit about what you can grow here. Um, Here's the future foodscaper. So I'm not even kidding. Sometimes I bring my kids on site, and they're helping with our crew. So they're really getting into this. It's really been great for our family, and it's great for the next generation, right? Helping them get off their devices, get off, they don't have devices, they're too young for that, but get them thinking less about Minecraft and more about, foodscapes. In my mind, that's a big win. So a little fun fact about our family before I talk a little bit about how we fell in this work. We have a cargo bike. We live in the town of Woodbury. I don't know if you know about it. I call it Woodbury. But the one benefit of Woodbury is there's 160 miles of bike trails, so I can bike to all the grocery stores and strip malls on the planet. Nothing really too cool to go to, but we get to basically the Target, church, and the coffee sometime on our or hockey there. I'm taking my son to hockey on our cargo bike. We've done about 3,000 miles since we've gotten it. And then we have a lot of food. We have, I think we've had a few 100 pounds of peaches this year. Our foodscape's projected to start getting into the thousands of pounds in a few years. So we're really excited about that. So a little bit of how we fell in this work. This is me and my glorious lawn when we moved to Woodbury back in like 2018. I was kind of like the typical suburban guy who moved to the suburbs to be closer to some family and stuck with this huge lawn. And, at first, I would say we paid for a lawn guy to come over and to do everything that every other American does, right? Let's spray and let's kill every weed. Let's kill all the biodiversity. Let's make it look nice just for everyone else and to compete with the neighbors. But what really shifted for me is when I went to Eastern Europe. And when I was there, I saw a dacha home. And it was the first time I was familiar with this whole idea of growing food at home. And this is, again, looks kind of like a typical Minnesota suburban home, let's say, or maybe ex-urban home. But instead of all this lawn, there's all this food, there's all this productivity. And it got me thinking a little bit about kind of this concept of life and death. I think in American culture, we tend to, as a culture, we tend to like worship our lawns for some reason. But lawns are really, in a way, they take a ton of resources, they're not biodiverse, and they're kind of what I would say more of kind of death, where edible landscapes and polyculture systems and systems that produce food are really life-giving. And so I started to look up some stats when I was over there, and I realized that some of these dacha homes, they produce 20, million acres of gardens and 40% of the food supply, where, the typical American suburban home, we have 47 million acres of lawn, and then, we pay 25 billion for lawn care industry. Basically, let's just dump chemicals all over our yards, right? It gets into the water supply and all these things just so we can have our yard look like it's a putting green, right? So this got me thinking, okay, maybe I should make a change, start gardening, getting into something different. And then the catalyst for me was COVID. As everybody knows, there was dolphins in Venice and there was clear skies and, all over these towns in China. And there's an awakening, right? I think it's interesting how, the word COVID it's kind of the word Corona is about the heart, right? And I think I had to change a heart. I worked in global travel, I jet set all around the world, and I realized I don't really want to do that anymore. I just want to be local, not global. I want to grow food And I noticed there was also a trend. We were in the Great Depression, and people getting into the food, growing food at home and gardening went up like huge. And so I realized that, okay, 2 in 5 households now are looking to grow food at home. And there's been a change in consciousness, a change in heart. And I want to be a part of that. So this is my son and I, and we built our first gardens, right, when everybody's in quarantine. And we just started small, like most people. So that was the kind of the first awakening. The second was, as the years went on early in COVID, I started to learn about something called permaculture. And permaculture, a lot of people think it's just perennial agriculture. But it's more than that. It's a system designed to create sustainable, self-sufficient ecosystem that mimic natural patterns. It's used as a lot of perennial plants versus annual plants, especially perennial food production plants. It integrates, sometimes animals if you're in certain areas. And it uses ecological principles to produce food with the minimal, external input possible, right? So unlike traditional gardening, right, when we got started a few years ago, traditional gardening often relies a lot on tilling, replanting, synthetic fertilizing inputs each year. And permaculture really emphasizes permanent planting, soil health regeneration, and then long-term resilience. And so here are a few of the principles. There's 15 or there's 12 principles. These are 5 that I love, right? Looking to observe and interact with the land. How do we use edges and value marginal spaces? How do we integrate plants rather than segregate, like in this monoculture system? And then how do we design in patterns that are found in nature? And how do we catch and store energy? So I could go through all 12 of them, but these are my 5 favorite when I go out and look at a new site. So when I discovered permaculture early on, I realized, oh, wow, there's over 150 varieties of perennial fruits, nuts, berries, vegetables, medicinal plants you can easily grow in your backyard. And that was kind of an awakening of, I love doing tomatoes and cucumbers and some of those annuals, but if I don't have to replant it every year and I can set up a system that's regenerative, there must be an easier way to, take this big lawn that I had, right, and turn it into something that's productive and not just stealing resources from our environment. So I'm going to shift before I dive more into foodscapes and talk a little bit about the challenges with the current food, the food system. As everybody's well aware, right? One of the big things I'm going to go through, several of these, but one is the deforestation of, for agriculture, right? I think it's no surprise, right? I mean, and again, I'm not a climate expert, so I'm not going to speak as one here. But there is crossover what we do with some of the things that we face in some of these challenges today. But there's a lot of rainforest that's been taken out just to be able to farm beef patties, right? There's a lot of destruction to the environment for these monoculture type systems that we build. And so that's one of the big challenges that I think we're facing today. The second is, herbs and pesticides and all herbicides and pesticides, right? That finds its way in a lot of our food. On grand scale farming, there's a lot of, in order to achieve the outcome that they're looking for, a lot of times they need to use these things, right, to get the food on the table for a lot of people. And as everybody's well aware here, I'm sure that there's, negative impacts to us as humans when we're digesting and eating certain things that have been sprayed. The other challenge, right, is processed and unnatural foods. I think that, especially, in our country, unfortunately, I think a lot of the developed world, right, when we get away from the soil, we get away from growing our own food, we got away from the victory gardens in World War II that people are coming together to solve for some of the food challenges, then, we start to get addicted to a lot of food that's just not really healthy for us, to be honest with you. And it's in terms of, a lot of communities, they kind of depend on this type of food, and it's not always, helping in the way that we want food to help our bodies, right? There's a lot of unnatural dyes as well. I mean, I could go on for hours and talk about this, but the other thing is food miles, right? There's this, sometimes you go to the store and you get a Honeycrisp apple is developed in Minnesota, right? But it's traveled all the way from Washington. Or, something that we're eating now is traveling from Chile, right? There's a lot of distance that travels for food. And again, some things like bananas, right? I can't grow a banana here, an orange. But there's other things that I can grow in my backyard that I know it doesn't need to travel, across the world for me to have access to. And if it's an off season, I can freeze it or can it or do other things with that food to still enjoy it when it's in the midwinter. And so that's a big thing that again, these huge supply chains we're really dependent on these central systems, right? And within those central systems, there's also the monoculture element to the food system. And again, it's not regenerative to the soil. It's really taxing on the soil. And again, to grow in mass quantities, this type of system has been kind of the preferred system because again, to create a huge polyculture system on a massive scale is a little bit harder. But in your backyard, it's much easier, and I'll go into that in a bit. And then last, I think, big global challenge, right? And I use American here, but it's the lawn culture, right? I think that there's a sense of this keep up with the Joneses mentality in our society of making sure that we make our lawns look like a golf course, right? And I think that that's a cultural thing that needs to shift. And I know that there's grants like Lawn de Legumes and other really great grants in Minnesota that encourage native plantings and encourage a more naturalistic approach to your yard. And I think we fit right into that. I think the edible space, again, a lot of our clients have applied for those grants and achieved them because we incorporate in a lot of more diverse plants and kind of getting people out of the lawn culture. And it doesn't mean you have to give up your whole lawn, but even just a section of it is really a powerful way for people to make a step forward. So the small local solution to these large global challenges are foodscapes. Here's some photos. This is my son with our peach tree. Here's, my other son with our little red currant bush. A shot of a butterfly out in a blazing star and some gooseberries and grapes. These are all from our foodscape, our little food forest that we planted in our backyard. And it's always a surprise. Every single month of the year, there's always something new that's coming into either flowering or fruiting. Our foodscape always has different scents and smells in the spring and different tastes and harvests in the fall. And I think that it's just such an amazing experience to start to take a little bit, even just a small amount of this back into our home, right? Because it's not like we don't go to the store. It's not like we're not, going to Costco at times, right? Like we're still a family that we depend on that. We're not totally off grid, but this is helping us to achieve little steps forward of taking some of this growing in-house. And just some food for thought, once a foodscape matures, especially if you have dozens of trees and bushes and all these perennial root vegetables, it can produce, up to thousands of pounds of fruit per year. And I try to figure out exactly how many, like I looked on AI and I was trying to find online studies, but from what I'm gathering, most Americans purchase about 4 to 5 pounds of fresh produce every trip to the grocery store. And so if you think about it, you go to the store to buy your apples, your peaches, your pears, these things. Being able to take some of those things back into your home it's a really achievable goal. And it might not be tomorrow when you just plant the tree, but give it 5-10 years. And once they start to really produce, you can really reap a huge harvest. So I want to dive into what a foodscape is, and then a little bit about, I think a lot of people have questions. Well, I've tried to grow trees and they get bugged out and they look gross and maybe I should just spray. I'm going to address that challenge too, of how our design or how we think about regenerative agriculture and how we incorporate things into the environment that help reduce the need for those artificial synthetic responses that we tend to default to when things don't go our way. So here's a foodscape. Again, some of the plants that we're growing, some of the herbs we're growing. But it's really just taking an unproductive landscape. Instead of putting conventional plants in, your your typical hydrangeas and your, you know, what your hostas, your hydrangeas, your, even though you can eat hostas, I don't know if you know that, your hydrangeas and your, um, you know, your daylilies and all the typical things that you see, bushes that don't do anything, they just look cool. You take that type of a landscape, you add productive plants, and the end goal of what you achieve is a foodscape or a food forest. And so we're just taking basically that same slot of land that you'd be using to grow, let's say, a lot of conventional plants, and we're just heavily packing it with food producing plants and plants that'll help benefit the ecosystem. I just want to check the time to see how I'm doing. Am I doing all right, Kai?
Yeah, it's currently 7:38. So
Okay, perfect. Good. I'll leave some room for questions. So within a foodscape, so there's 7 edible layers in every foodscape. And so a lot of times you think about annual gardening, when people are, wanting to do the tomato and the cucumber garden, that's really just one of the layers. Some of the other layers are there's like fruit trees that there's, tons of different varieties that you can grow in Minnesota, like anything from apricots, pears, cherries, peaches, plums. A lot of these people don't know even there's a hardy fig that you can grow here. And so that's kind of the next layer, the overstory fruit tree layer. And then there's the bush layer of nuts. There's a lot of the most common nut you can grow here because you can't grow like pecans is like hazelnuts. And then there's a lot of perennial vegetables that are lost in time in a way. If you go to one of the nurseries we source from is called Planting Justice, and they're out of California, and they're cultivating a lot of these neat perennial vegetables that are tubers and ground artichokes and um, different perennial spinaches and perennial carrot items and perennial broccolis that have kind of been lost in time. And so again, you can totally seed for a lot of these plants every year in your annual gardens, but just imagine like the bounty of just being able to plant one thing one time and just keep getting more and more harvests. One of them, a very common one is like walking onions, right? You plant one walking onion and just give it 10 years and it'll turn into 1,000, right? Because they just keep reproducing exponentially. And so a lot of these plants are really fun because they have some of these exponential gains as they just want to continue to, some people call it invasive, right, in a way. But if you're harvesting it and you're using it, there's a plenty of abundance that you can receive just by planting a lot of these perennial vegetables that will kind of take over an area of land and spread naturally. The next one is medicinal plants. There's a lot of, dozens and dozens of, from your kind of softer medicinal plants like your herbs and your lemon balms, your mints to ones that are, more powerful like your St. John's wort, your skull caps and those things. All these plants are really beneficial for our need to, for over-the-counter type, remedies. We're not an organization that won't tell you to go get an antibiotic if you need one, right? But if you need to, if you have a stomach ache, there's some plants that you can eat like lovage that'll alleviate some of the issues that you might be having, right? And some of these softer herbs will just help you relax more, like lavender or chamomile, right? And so, of course, you can go to the tea, you can buy the packets, but there's something so special about just getting some of the chamomile and lavender out of your garden. Just making your own tea, knowing it came fresh from your backyard, you weren't spraying it, you weren't tampering with it. The other 2 layers are the vines, so the climbers, right? A lot of times people think of grapes, as a common climber. There's tons of different grape varieties you could do here. University of Minnesota is even they're releasing a new table grape. I think that they're wanting people to kind of test on the market right now. So they're doing a ton of great work. There's a plant called hardy kiwi. There's like little kiwi berries. You can get them sometimes at Whole Foods this time of year. They're probably being imported from South America, to be honest. But in the fall, you can get them, and those are the ones that are probably coming domestically to our tables. But they're like little kiwis that are the size of grapes, and they taste a little bit more berryish than the typical super silky kiwi, but they're delicious berries as well. And then there's like hops, for your home brewers, right? I brewed a few years ago, but there's tons of different varieties of hops that you can use. And again, that can be used for, tons of different applications outside of just beer. And then there's the berries. There's the common berries that everybody's aware of, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, but there's really dozens of different varieties of uncommon berries, like your gooseberries and your currants and your nanny berries and thimbleberries and honeyberries, josta berries. Like some of these you've probably never even heard of, but they're berries that are lost in time. There's a lot of, I think back in uh, I forget the turn of the century, there was a lot of cultivation of currants and gooseberries, but there was a disease that was spreading among some pine trees at the time. And so the decision was made to basically stop the production of these berries to save the pine trees. So they never really made it as commonly on the market in America as they did in like the UK and other areas. But for home growers, it's definitely, some of these berries you can bring back and you can bake with or eat fresh with. And so we always suggest and want our clients to do a lot more unique berries besides the three common ones you get at the store. So that's a little bit about the edible layers of a foodscape. And everybody here can take a step just to go to the nursery and start doing some of this, right? It's not beyond anybody's ability to plant a little fruit tree guild, and you can look it up online. You can just Google it and see some combinations of things to do, and just start with one tree. Like a peach, it's a self-pollinating tree. Plant a couple currants around it. Some clover for nitrogen fixing and some other things, and you got yourself a little perennial garden. So within the system of edible layers, which provide the kind of year-round bounty in your backyard, uh, the question is always asked, okay, well, I get tons of, um, bugs in my fruit, and I think we've all walked by like a street and we see this huge apple tree and it's bug, every apple's like looks rotten, right? You won't want to eat it. So the way that we solve for this is we bring in what we call like ecological functional plants or like permaculture type plants. In the permaculture world, it's called stacking functions. And basically, we incorporate in aromatic herbs and flowers, which confuse and repel like pest insects. And then there's native wildflowers that draw in pollinators and increase biodiversity, which attracts like a ton of variety of predatory insects, which help reduce pest populations. And so a lot of these like native trees and flowers provide habitat and food sources for native fauna, which support a resilient ecosystem, and it helps bring stability and reduces the likelihood of infestation of pest insects. And so the story is, and that's a lot of information. The story is, right, you have Joe neighbor, and they say, I'm going to plant 3 apple trees in my yard. And they plant 3 trees, and that year everything's bugged out, and there's rust, and there's funguses, and there's, the trees just look terrible. And the reason they look terrible is, Joe neighbor might be spraying his lawn. He might just be killing off all the biodiversity, but he just wants fruit. And then he wants to pay the lawn guy now to spray his trees because there's an imbalance in the system. So we actually incorporate in these seven functions to help balance the system out, right? We're replicating like a system found in nature. So there's pest attracting plants, pollinating plants, weed suppressing plants, plants that fix nitrogen, plants that even build soil and acidify soil. That's kind of a long game, so we still recommend using acidifier for like blueberries and lingonberries. But then there's no mow pathways as well, right? So a lot of the issues are people, well, I don't want to mow around on my, all these trees. Well, we can create systems that basically are designed to be self-contained ecosystems that you have all these functional plants supporting each other. And so the ecology is balanced, right? Where again, and if you go to any orchard, around here, I'm sure that they spray their trees, and it's kind of a monoculture approach, right? So it's so fun to have this polyculture approach in your backyard, right? So I'm just gonna just breeze through this quick because I want to leave time for questions. But I want to talk a little bit about how foodscapes support the ecosystem. Um, the first one is just localized food, right? Fresh, nutrient dense, zero emissions after installation. Like I'm still coming over with the truck because I need to haul a trailer with plants and with mulch and with some of the dirt. But after it's set up, and if we need a skid, we'll use it. But after it's set up, like as long as it's healthy and growing, it's going to be, a system that you're not having to drive to the store to get some of the plants that you want. And it's going to really localize your experience, that kind of farm to fork, or what we like to call like backyard to fork. Um, the second is biodiversity. Again, habitat for beneficial pollinators, birds, and other creatures. Uh, we're very native, kind of complementary. We're edible first, and then we complement with the natives. Tim, who isn't here, he's got over 20 years of experience in the industry with like a specialty in native plantings, right? So we're always trying to find unique new native plants to incorporate into the system. And a lot of those really, I mean, honestly, the quality of your fruit is like 10 times better just by densely populating the system with a lot of these plants. Plus, you see cool, like I see like hummingbirds all the time and like bees and butter. Like these are things, again, the guy in the lawn, like me years ago, like you didn't see any of these, I didn't see any of these like years ago when I bought our home. So soil regeneration. So that's Tim. He's in front of one of the comfrey plants. Comfrey is called like a biomass natural accumulator. So it basically has a deep taproot that goes deep in the soil and it mines out all the right levels of potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus into the leaves. And then when it dies off, it'll deposit that on the topsoil. So this is like a natural fertilizing plant. So again, with that polyculture regenerative type system, we plant bees a lot in the fruit tree guilds and they get a lot bigger. I'm going to shut the door because there's a vacuum quick. Sorry, I'm at our office. The cleaning staff's here. So that plant's like an amazing plant that we'd love to incorporate in. You can make, compost tea out of it and keep feeding your plants, building the soil. And I've seen it in my own lawn where I've planted literally a comfrey in the lawn, like alone by a tree. And then 5 feet later, I dig up the soil under and just see what it looks like. And under the comfrey area, it's like really dark, lush, beautiful soil. And where we live in Woodbury, a lot of the soil was sold off, because when they built the development, they just got rid of all the good farm soil. It's just clay, right? So again, that's like even with clay soil or soil that's broken, we can repair it through this plant. And then clover is a great plant that fixes nitrogen. It provides a no-mow environment. You'll see a lot of the clover here. You can really start seeding it in your lawn today, and it's just going to be so much healthier. It's going to be greener all year. Like I remember in August, this property, it was like they didn't have irrigation, so this was all brown, and this was just even greener than this. I mean, it's just amazing how it benefits the ground, and I don't know why people got away from it because it's so pretty, and it takes zero water to grow. Well, it takes some water. Everything takes water, but it doesn't take as much as grass. The other way foodscapes support the ecosystem is water efficiency. So, a lot of times in a lot of systems that you plant, they'll plant all these conventional plants with real shallow roots, and they might not harvest water. So the plant might do well for 2 to 3 years and die out. In our system, and this is actually Kai's house here that we built this berm, this swale. There's probably a 1 foot trench we dug out here on contour, and all the water that's running off is going to find its way into this berm. And we're going to plant basically a row of apple trees here. And the reason we're doing it this way and this example is because there's this huge tree that's sucking up all the resources. That's a good overstory tree. You don't want to cut down trees to do a foodscape. We always try to limit the environmental impact because it's providing habitat for a lot of plants and animals and birds and wildlife. So instead of cutting down anything, we just build a berm, capture the water, and then these trees are all going to be able to grow successfully because they're not going to compete for as much of the water nutrients as the bigger tree is here, because we're going to capture it, and the runoff that would go to the street, we're trying to create like a nice water table under this area. Here's an example of, some swales that were built on contour for a project we did a few years ago. And then here's some native plants as well that you can see here. Again, if you don't know a lot about natives, they have really deep roots, so they're able to survive drought conditions a lot better. And you don't have to replace them as often. The last thing is carbon sequestration. So, as we mentioned, there's a lot of forest that's being like kind of destroyed today. And over the years, even since I was a young lad myself, right? So we can start planting new forests in our backyard of fruit trees. And, a lot of the ash trees are gone. We get calls from people like, my ash trees, we lost 3 of them, right? What do we do? And we're coming over and we're going to throw in 3 new fruit trees, right? So I think that there's a way to just kind of when humans take from the land we can also give back, right? We can make up for the loss of what's happened. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity for a lot of these lawns in America, right? And unproductive spaces that require a lot of resources to start growing these mini food forests and foodscapes. A lot of our clients just see a ton of new wildlife and birds and everything show up after these come in. And then polyculture systems. So again, we talked a little bit about monoculture. Food forests are easy to be a polyculture system because it's a homegrown type of solution. It's not necessarily you're not farming on a mass scale. And so you can really get away with doing a lot of unique integrating of plants rather than segregating, creating more robust ecosystems, repairing the soil. Because again, you're just harvesting for yourself or for your neighbors, right? Or for your loved ones. And so it's one of these things that I just love, which will lead to the last one, which is community abundance, right? This is bringing people together like never before. At least I've seen it. Like there's so many people, I think, throughout Minnesota, but even I think the country and the world right now that are wanting to share, to build community. We spend a lot of time on our devices. We spend a lot of time, stuck in digital world, right? But to get your hands in soil, there's studies that show it basically helps relieve depression. It releases serotonin in our brains. It helps build societal relationships, right, with people and neighbors that are close by. And then it also is just good for your physical health. And it's good to just help your kids or your family or loved ones just be able to understand how nature works, right? Food doesn't come from the grocery store. It really comes from trees and plants that provide. And creation is abundant. And I think that the scarcity mindset, shifting from that to an abundance mindset, is a big part of a lot of our clients' journey in terms of the way that they see foodscapes, bringing people together and growing every year. So thank you. I want to leave some time for questions. I went over a lot of info, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that you all might have.
Hey, Jordan, this is Bill Weimer, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm a woodburian or woodburian, like you said, as well. So someday I'd sure like to meet with you and hear more about this and see, because I'm interested. I'm coincidentally a new member of the HOA in the neighborhood I sit in Evergreen. So probably Evergreen.
Yep.
And so I've learned that there are covenants within the HOA, agreement that basically they're super old school, right? This is an old Woodbury neighborhood, and it refers to things like you'll have turf from the road to the other end of your property. And I was amazed to see that because there are discussions going on with various neighbors who have gone natural, and some of the old members, so to speak, old members of the HOA are resisting the what they would call kind of a South Minneapolis kind of front yard, right?
Yeah.
And and so I'm real interested to talk to you more because I like what you're doing. I'm inclined to go the same way for environmental reasons, and so on. I'm kind of wondering if it'll be more saleable for me and the group that I'm trying to work with. If there's kind of a hybrid where you stage in a certain amount of food and stage another stage out a certain amount of turf and then end up with something, everyone might end up with a different kind of mixture from 0 to 50% turf or something.
Yeah, Bill, I think you bring up a great point, and we actually, one of the things we're trying to solve for is the HOA communities. And Tim and I, what we're working on constantly is this idea of, talked a lot about foodscapes, like these bigger, like kind of set apart ecosystems that might be a little bit pushing it for the HOA community. But we talk about the solution being like what we call edible landscaping. So it's trying to create something that looks more traditional, but it's incorporating a lot more of these native and edible perennials into the system, without like shaking up the community too much. So it's like just moving it a little bit, like just moving the marker here. I
Yeah,
think that it can really go a long way with HOAs because they start to see the value in it.
yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that's the approach. I think we don't have a choice. There have been folks that have done certain things and they've been allowed to. So there's kind of no going back within this HOA, but there's still kind of a resistance, that, and it's a bunch of traditional folks that, grew up with lawns and therefore, we won't stick with them. But, but good. I like what you're doing. That's great.
Thanks, Bill.
I see that there's a question in the chat. Jennifer is asking. So, Jordan, can you tell us a little bit about what your typical client looks like? And how do people, like, what kinds of questions do you ask to just get started?
Yeah, so our clients range from people with no gardening experience to people that already are extensively into gardens and perennial vegetables and everything. They range from people in HOAs to people in the exurbs. They range from people who are very climate conscientious to your hardcore libertarians who want to bury gold in their backyard, to be honest. I think that there isn't really like a target client. I think it's anybody who's just open to seeing something different in their yard. They have some space and maybe they have kids or maybe they're early retirement. And they're just wanting to get into something new, and to interact with nature. I think that's kind of the client we see. And sometimes it's, a mom of some kids, and sometimes it's a dad of kids, or a dad who's single or whatever. I mean, it's it does vary quite a bit. And sometimes it surprises me, in terms of our client base. So, a lot of times to get started, I'll just say like we do a survey to identify a list of all the plants people might be interested in growing. Then we do a permaculture assessment, and we really say that there's no right or wrong answer. Like we're not trying to shame people if they spray their lawns or stuff like that, right? Like, I think we're just trying to be very positive. Like you can do something different and it's okay. And so usually we start with a survey and kind of an online meeting. And then from there we do an on-site consultation and we usually start a design. And you've probably seen some of those diagrams you've seen or some of the designs that we've done.
Okay, hey, Jordan, we got a request. Can you stop sharing your screen so we can have more of
Yeah.
a discussion now?
Sorry.
Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Jordan, I had a question. You mentioned not spoiling the fruit, bugs and so forth. What about rodents? I got squirrels over the place, rabbits, birds.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we know, so how do I say this? Birds are going to be birds. They're going to come in and they're going to do what birds do. So usually when we plant, we do an extensive planting. So there's still harvest for you and the birds don't take it all over. When it comes to rabbits, we won't do a project unless if we require temporary fencing for a rabbit to protect against rabbits. Because if somebody's gonna invest a bunch of money into doing all these plants and working with us, we don't want rabbits to eat all the things that you just put in. And it's like for us, we're just like devastated. So until there's enough biomass, until it starts growing enough, we always say you got to keep the fences in. And for deer, a lot of times you can do trap crops and then winterize your trees and those types of things. It will bring wildlife in, but it's not, once it starts growing, there'll be enough to go around where it's not all gonna get devoured.
Of course, those squirrels, they get through anything, and there's oak trees all down my street, so.
Yeah, that squirrels are tough because you can't, rabbits are kind of in this dimensional world, and squirrels are kind of everywhere. So you just have to plant enough, that's a big part of what we always encourage is just do more because just like if you might have Japanese beetles, right? But if you have so much going on, they're not going to decimate everything. But the same thing with the squirrels, right? So
Oh, Tammy?
thanks too.
Hey, good evening. Fantastic presentation. Just a quick personal question. Have you seen between yourself and your family an improvement in your health since you have put the foodscape in your yard over the years? Are you healthier? Can you definitively say that? And have there been any studies related to foodscapes and health?
It would be great if like a university run a study. I'm not familiar with one, but in my experience, in a subjective experience, I should say, like 100%. I feel healthier than I've ever felt. It's I don't, in a foodscape, you don't really there's kind of this like group that sometimes tries to sell it like it's like no, it's like you go to McDonald's or something. It's like you just roll up to the drive-through and get food, and it does take stewardship. It takes a little bit of a go-getter to get in it, and we don't want it to be a full-time job for anybody. We don't want it even to be a part-time job, but just replacing an hour at the gym with just an hour out in the foodscape and just tending it, and retaking care of it in the spring if you need to remulch areas and do things. I feel like it's time and energy well spent for a greater yield, and in terms of exercise and quality of life. And then I just think in terms of the food too, like I feel so much healthier, especially this time of year when things start to like come into harvest, even like the early harvesting items. Like I'm constantly trying to eat something from it every day if I can. And I think it motivates you to choose healthier options when you are out in the world anyway, just because you're always thinking about it in your backyard. So that's kind of the consensus, is that a lot of people get into this because they find somebody and they're like, this guy's really healthy. What are they doing? They're like the guy, the food gardener guy, right? And you can see a lot of them online, right? Or on YouTube. You can find a bunch of them there, and you'll kind of see their lifestyle and activity. So
Great. Well, we can certainly wrap up. If anybody does have a last question, feel free to jump in now. All right, then I think maybe we'll call it a night. Jordan, thank you so much. This was so interesting and inspiring. So you may be getting calls from all over the region.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you all invited me on. I'm pumped, and it's yeah, it's really nice to meet everybody. Thanks for the questions, and thanks Kai for inviting me. And yeah, look forward to contact me if you have any questions. My number is on the website, my email. Feel free to give me a call. We'd love to chat or set up a consult. It's a busy time of year, but want to make sure that we're there for anybody who has questions. So
Oh, you know what, Jordan? I thought of one more question.
Yeah.
So I understand that you're working with Kai now. So how long should we give Kai's garden to like really get going before we all come over and visit him?
there's kind of a few milestones. Like there's kind of the 3, the 5, and like the 10-year miles, or the 3, the 5, and the 10-year. I think by the year 10, it's usually the trees are really packing out fruit, right? By the year 5, they're starting to mature pretty well. But you might not be getting full harvest on all the trees, but you might get some like bounty crops. Like we had an apricot we did 3 years. I planted in 2022, and this year it's going to give like 200 apricots. It's going to be amazing. But it's taken a few years to get there, right? I think, what is it, 25? So years go by quick. So 3 years, but some of the other trees are still just catching up on root growth and branch growth and everything. So, and then year 1 to 3 is kind of the wait game. You'll get some cool berry harvests and some smaller things, but usually by year 5, you start to get the larger fruits. And then year 10, it's like packed out. So it's a curve kind of like this. It's more like a linear curve, I would say. It's not like a exponential curve.
Right. Well, Kai, that gives you lots of time to plan for.
I'm looking forward to it. I'd love to have everybody over and show them the garden. So have a fun garden tour.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even in the spring, it's fun just to smell the trees. Like there's the aromatics are just, it's like you walk around, I feel like I'm in like a magical scent of, like it's like my friend called it like, it smells like soap in here. It's like so lovely, like it's like, all right. But yeah, it's kind of amazing because it's not just the fruit, it's like the experience of the spring and the fall and seeing it grow, and everything is just a win and there's setbacks too, but you learn, and that's part of the whole experience. So
Excellent.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Really looking forward to sharing it with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll come over too, Kai, and
Absolutely.
party.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.